Hey guys, welcome to Intelligent Faith 315. My name is Pastor Jay. So glad you've taken the time to join us today. We're going to be continuing on with the series we've been doing called Ancient Non-Christian Historical Evidence for the Life of Jesus of Nazareth. So again, if you remember, some of the individuals that we've talked about are famous Roman historians such as Tacitus and Suetonius, or Jewish historians such as Flavius Josephus. We've even mentioned two Roman emperors, Emperor Hadrian and Trajan. And of course, the benefit to investigating this type of historical evidence concerning Jesus is many people, they'll take the position that if you mention, let's say, historical evidence from the early church fathers, Ignatius, Irenaeus, Tertullian, Justin Martyr, Polycarp, guys like this, that kind of historical information shouldn't really be admitted for consideration because, of course, well, they have a historical bias. Well, all of us have a historical bias, but if you just want to kind of circumvent or bypass that criticism, you can just begin to talk about the 17 or so non-Christian historical sources that exist pertaining to the historical verifiability of so many aspects of Jesus' life. So Dr. Gary Habermas from Liberty University, he's done the most groundbreaking research in this area. We're simply reading through this dissertation paper that he has on his website, garyhabermas.com. That's GaryHabermas.com. Fantastic historical apologist, probably the premier Christian apologist today regarding the historical evidence for the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Gary Habermas, without using scripture really, he can verify that the most logical historical conclusion that you can come to with the evidence of about 4 to 6 historical facts is that Jesus Christ literally physically rose from the dead, just like he said he would. So Gary Habermas is an outstanding apologist at Liberty University. I believe that he is the department head of philosophy and apologetics at Liberty. And so we're just reading through his dissertation paper. So again, I just to encourage you to review some of this information, watch our past video posts on this topic, on this series, on the website. You can just look on the right side of the website over here and just scroll on down to the bottom. And just look for the series, Ancient Non-Christian Historical Sources. Get familiar with it. Go to Dr. Habermas's website, download and print out the paper, and get familiar with this stuff because it's great historical ammunition and tools to have with you as you begin to dialogue and converse with people about the historical existence of Jesus of Nazareth. You're probably not going to come across too many atheists or agnostics who deny the historical, verifiable existence of the man, Jesus of Nazareth, but then again, you might occasionally come across some folks who deny that. Christopher Hitchens, when he was still among us, I have heard him made a couple of comments. Richard Dawkins has made a couple of comments to that. Or some folks may just say something to the effect of, well, if Jesus ever did exist, we surely can't know anything in particular or specific about him. So this ancient non-Christian historical evidence goes a long way to corroborate the historical information that we find in the documents of the New Testament, then also the historical sources of the early church fathers. And then if you put this non-Christian historical evidence next to that, tremendous corroboration and just very, very strongly attested historical facts in the realm of ancient history. So great stuff to have. Just to bring up to speed as to what we've covered thus far, as I said, we've already discussed some of the ancient non-Christian testimony that was given by Flavius Josephus. He lived from 37 to 97 A.D., Tacitus, he was a Roman historian from 55 to 120 A.D. Suetonius was a Roman historian from 40 to 120. Julius Africanus, another Roman historian from 221 A.D. Thallus, a Roman historian from 52 A.D. And then we talked about a couple of government sources, 3 to be precise. Emperor Trajan, a Roman emperor who reigned from 117 to 138 A.D. Pliny the Younger, who was a government official around 112 A.D. And also Emperor Hadrian. He's another Roman emperor. I don't have his dates on me right here. So, excellent non-Christian historical sources that we've covered thus far. Today, we're going to be discussing a man named Lucian, who was a Greek satirist. He was a Greek author. And then also Mara Bar Serapion, actually a father who was imprisoned in jail, writing a letter to his dear son, encouraging him to learn from the wisdom of past teachers. Among the list of people he includes is Jesus. So we're going to look at these two ancient historical writings today, and we'll see what historical facts and nuggets we can draw out from that, and then put them towards our case for the historical verifiability of the man Jesus of Nazareth. All right, here we go. Other Gentile sources. This is straight from the dissertation paper from Dr. Habermas. Lucian. A 2nd century Greek satirist, Lucian spoke rather derisively of Jesus and early Christians. His point was to criticize Christians for being such gullible people that, with very little warrant, they would approve charlatans who pose as teachers. Hopefully we're not still guilty of that today, right, Christians? Thereby supporting these persons even to the point of making them wealthy. In the process of his critique, he relates some important facts concerning Jesus and Christians. Here we go. Quoting from the 2nd century Greek satirist, Lucian said this, quote, "The Christians, you know, worship a man to this day, the distinguished personage who introduced their novel rites and was crucified on that account. You see, these misguided creatures start with the general conviction that they are immortal for all time, which explains their contempt of death and their voluntary self-devotion, which are so common among them. And then it was impressed on them by their original lawgiver that they are all brothers from the moment that they are converted and deny the gods of Greece and worship the crucified sage, and they live after his laws. All this they take quite on faith, with the result that they despise all worldly goods alike, regarding them merely as common property." Excuse me. That's an interesting historical quote from Lucian. Let's try to see what historical nuggets and facts we can draw out of his material there. From the material supplied by Lucian, we may derive the following data concerning Jesus and early Christians. Number 1, we are told that Jesus was worshipped by Christians. Now, why is that important? Well, if it's in the 2nd century, that's in about, let's say, 150 AD, this would cut right against that theory that Christ worship developed much, much later and was not something that was originally taught in the Gospels nor practiced by early believers. But obviously Lucian, a non-Christian historical source, a Greek satirist, he gives historical evidence of the fact that Christ worship had already been taking place well into the beginning of the 2nd century. So it just shoots down that theory that Christ worship developed later on. So we're told, number 1, that Jesus was worshipped by the Christians. Number 2, it's also related that Jesus introduced new teachings in Palestine. The location is given in another unquoted portion of section 2. Number 3, we can learn that Jesus was crucified because of these teachings, and Jesus taught his followers certain doctrines, such as, number 4, they believe that all believers are brothers. Number 5, we can learn that from the moment that conversion takes place, they believe that. Number 6, we can also learn that after the false gods are denied, such as the gods of Greece. That was another teaching of Christ we can learn. Additionally, these teachings of Jesus included, number 7, historical fact, worshiping Jesus, and 8, living according to his laws. Historical fact number 9, Lucian refers to Jesus as a sage, which, especially in a Greek context, would be to compare him to the Greek philosophers and wise men. Concerning Christians, we are told, number 10, that they are the followers of Jesus who, number 11, believe themselves to be immortal. Lucian explains that this latter belief accounts for their contempt of death. In other words, they were willing and oftentimes unafraid to die. Number 12, Christians accepted Jesus' teachings by faith. And 13, they practiced their faith by their disregard for material possessions as revealed by the holding of common property among believers. So those are 13 historical facts we can draw from the writings of Lucian. The portion of Lucian that is not quoted, this is an additional document, presents some additional facts. Fact number 14, the Christians had sacred writings, which are frequently read. Fact number 15, when something affected their community, quote, they spare no trouble and no expense. Interesting words we should probably live by even today, right? And then fact number 16, however, Lucian notes that Christians were easily taken advantage of by unscrupulous individuals. And from Lucian, then, we learn a number of important facts about Jesus and early Christians, and many of these are not reported by other extra New Testament beliefs. So that's interesting stuff. At least 16 historical facts that we can draw out of this non-Christian historical source, Lucian, a Greek satirist. Also, Mara Bar Serapion. Who is that, you might ask? Well, the British Museum owns the manuscript of a letter written sometime between the late 1st and 3rd centuries AD. Its author was a Syrian named Mara Bar Serapion, a man, okay? Mara Bar Serapion, who was writing from prison to motivate his son, Serapion, to emulate wise teachers of the past. Now here comes the quotation of Mara Bar Serapion's letter. He says to his son, quote, "What advantage did the Athenians gain from putting Socrates to death? Famine and plague came upon them as a judgment for their crime. What advantage did the men of Samos gain from burning Pythagoras?" These are two obviously ancient Greek philosophers. "In a moment their land was covered with sand. What advantage did the Jews gain from executing their wise king, capital K? It was just after that their kingdom was abolished. God justly avenged these three wise men. The Athenians died of hunger, the Samians were overwhelmed by the sea, and the Jews, ruined and driven from their land, live in complete dispersion. But Socrates did not die for good, because he lived on in the statue of Hera. Nor did the wise king, speaking of Jesus, die for good. He lived on in the teaching which he had given." From this passage, we can learn certain historical facts. Number one, we can learn that Jesus was considered to be a wise and virtuous man. Fact number two, he is addressed twice as the Jews' king, possibly a reference to Jesus' own teachings about himself, to that of his followers, or even to the wording on the titulus placed over Jesus' head on the cross. And you'll remember that the inscription over the cross read, Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. In Latin, Hebrew, and I believe there was a third language, I believe Greek. Latin, Hebrew, and Greek. Historical fact number three that we can learn, Jesus was executed unjustly by the Jews, who paid for their misdeeds by suffering judgment soon afterward, probably at least as reference to the fall of Jerusalem to the Roman armies. That'd be in 70 AD by Titus Vespasian when he came and he sacked the city. Fact number four, Jesus lived on in the teachings of the early Christians, which is an indication that Mara Bar Serapion was almost certainly not a Christian. Rather, he follows Lucian and others in the popular comparison of Jesus to philosophers and other wise men in the ancient world. So, interesting stuff that we can gain from Lucian and Mara Bar Serapion. We're going to continue on next week. I don't want to get into it now. We're going to get into the Gnostic sources. The Gnostics are a very interesting and by this time well-known group of early Christian, basically heretics. It was a cult. It was a sect that prided itself on secret knowledge. This is why they take the name Gnostic, or it comes from the Greek word gnosis, which means to know. They prided themselves in secret spiritual mystical knowledge. And so we'll look at some of the historical writings that have come down from the Gnostics that claim to be authentic Christian writings, but they portray Christ in a very unbiblical, different light. But we can still glean interesting, valuable historical information from these documents. Documents such as the Gospel of Truth, the Apocryphon of John, the Gospel of Thomas, the Treatise on the Resurrection. So many of you might be familiar with some of these works because there's a novelist who's made a couple of movies today. His name is Dan Brown, with the Da Vinci Code and then Angels and Demons, and he's popularized a lot of these Gnostic documents. So we'll get into those next time, and we'll continue on in our series, Ancient Non-Christian Historical Sources for the Life of Jesus of Nazareth. Hope you enjoyed it, guys. Review the rest of the videos. And do encourage you, until next time, have an intelligent faith. God bless you.